My mother raised her glass and said the cruelest thing she'd ever said to me, and she was laughing. I want you to picture the dining room in my mother's Pacific Heights home. 14-foot ceilings. Italian marble floors that click under heels, the way money always does, sharp and deliberate and impossible to ignore. A chandelier she imported from Prague, hand-blown glass that catches light like something. My sister Natalie is 37, a cardiovascular surgeon at Northwestern Memorial. Drives a white Tesla, vacations in Positano, and has never once in her adult life washed a dish in someone else's kitchen. I want you to understand the geography of this family before I tell you what happened at Thanksgiving. Because what happened at that table didn't start with my mother's toast. It started 20 years ago in a house in Naperville, Illinois, where two daughters were quietly assigned their destinies before they were old enough to argue. My mother, Sandra Reeves, had decided by the time Natalie and I were in middle school which one of us was the investment and which one was the reminder. Natalie was the investment. I was the reminder. The reminder of what happened when you didn't try hard enough, didn't listen, didn't perform. I was the story she told to make Natalie run faster. So when I pulled up to my mother's house in Wilmette that Wednesday night before Thanksgiving in my 2019 Honda Civic with a crack in the passenger side window that I kept meaning to fix, I already knew the table was set. Not the literal table, though Sandra had outdone herself with the cream linen, the Waterford crystal, the autumnal centerpiece that probably cost $300 from that boutique florist on Green Bay Road. The emotional table. Every seat had a role. Every wine glass had a script. Here's what nobody tells you about surviving a family like mine. The cruelest cuts don't come from anger. They come gift-wrapped in a laugh. There were 14 people at that dinner. Sandra had invited her book club friends, two of them, Patricia and Donna, women who had known us since we were in pigtails, and who looked at me the way people look at a rescue dog, sweet, a little sad, trying their best. Natalie's husband, Ford, yes, his name is Ford, like the car, like the president, like something built to last, sat at the end of the table, looking like a Ralph Lauren ad that had learned to hold a fork. He's a real estate developer, 42, silver threading through his dark hair, a jaw that looked expensive. Ford had built 3 luxury residential towers on the near north side and was in the middle of closing a deal worth $60-something million. I know because he mentioned it twice before the salad course. My Aunt Rhonda was there, Sandra's younger sister, who had driven up from Indianapolis and who wore a sequined top to Thanksgiving like the holiday owed her something. There were 2 of Natalie's hospital colleagues, a couple named Brock and Simone Hargrove, both physicians. Both dressed in that particular way rich people dress when they're trying to look casual and accidentally look like a Nordstrom catalog. There were neighbors, the Callahan family from 2 doors down. And there was my mother's financial advisor, a man named Stuart Pele, 50s, silver hair, who sat next to Sandra and laughed at everything she said 3 beats too late. Like he was translating it from another language first. And then there was me, Caroline, the maid. I need you to pay attention to Stuart Pell because I was the only one at that table who knew what he actually was to my mother. And it wasn't her financial advisor. The dinner itself was fine for the first hour. Sandra had hired a caterer, naturally, because cooking for her own family on Thanksgiving would have been beneath the mythology she'd constructed around herself. The effortlessly sophisticated widow, the self-made woman, the mother of a surgeon. My father, Robert Reeves, had died 4 years ago. Heart attack, they said. Fast. I had not cried as much as I thought I would, and I've spent a lot of time in the years since trying to decide whether that makes me a bad daughter or just an honest one. Robert had been a quiet man, an architect, gentle in the way that people are gentle when they've learned that gentleness is the only armor that doesn't get stripped off you. He loved me in that steady, undramatic way that Sandra always found disappointing. He used to leave $20 bills in my coat pockets when I wasn't looking. He came to every single one of my art school shows, even the ones that were genuinely terrible. Sandra came to none of them. The wine was flowing, the catered food was hitting. Some kind of maple brine turkey situation that I had to admit was extraordinary, and I was actually starting to think we might get through it. Natalie was across the table from me, beautiful in a burgundy wrap dress, her hair blown out, a diamond bracelet catching the candlelight every time she reached for her glass. She'd glanced at me once when I arrived and said, "You look tired, Care," which, from Natalie, is approximately as warm as it gets. We are not close. We haven't been close since I was 19, and she told me, during a fight I barely remember starting, that I needed to stop expecting life to be fair and start working harder. She was 22 at the time, pre-med, already fluent in the language of Sandra. Then Sandra stood up with her wine glass. When a woman like my mother stands up at a dinner table with a glass of Pinot Noir and a smile that wide, you should know someone is about to bleed. She started with Natalie. Of course, she started with Natalie. She talked about the hospital promotion, the research paper Natalie had published in some cardiology journal, the charity gala Natalie and Ford had hosted last spring that raised $200,000 for pediatric heart care. Patricia and Donna were nodding like they were at church. Brock Hargrove raised his glass. Ford smiled the particular smile of a man who has been correctly complimented and expected nothing less. Sandra was glowing, and I sat there watching her perform. The love she had for her older daughter like it was a TED Talk, thinking, okay, here we go. Get through this, smile, drink your wine, it's one dinner. Then Sandra turned to me. She said it laughing. That's the part I need you to understand. She wasn't cruel in a fist-through-the-wall way. Sandra Reeves doesn't do anything so inelegant. She said it the way you deliver a punchline at a roast, with timing, with a twinkle, with just enough affection wrapped around the knife that everyone at the table couldn't quite decide if they'd heard what they thought they heard. And Caroline, she said, swirling her glass, well, one daughter is a doctor, the other is a maid. She laughed. Full, bright, genuine laughter, and a few people laughed with her, that nervous, confused social laughter where you're not sure what's funny, but someone elegant is laughing, so maybe you should too. Patricia stopped laughing first. Donna looked at her plate. Ford's smile didn't move. Natalie looked at me for exactly 1 second and then looked away. I didn't say anything. I picked up my wine glass and I took a long sip and I looked at my mother and I smiled. And if Sandra Reeves knew me at all, which she doesn't, and that is her greatest tactical error, she would have been afraid of that smile. What happened next is not what you think. And the reason it's not what you think is because I had been waiting, quietly and patiently, for exactly this moment. Not to cry. Not to yell. To finish what I'd started 6 months ago. Without anyone at that table knowing I'd started anything at all, let me back up. Because you need to understand how I got from broke and humiliated to ready. And that story starts 8 months ago in a penthouse on East Lake Shore Drive that belongs to a man named Harrison Caldwell. Harrison is 61, old Chicago money, third-generation real estate. He and his wife Celeste own the penthouse I clean every Thursday and Monday. I've been working for a domestic staffing agency called Prestige Home Services for 2 years. They send me to 6 different clients across the Gold Coast and Lincoln Park, all of them wealthy, most of them pleasant enough. A few of them the kind of people who leave passive-aggressive notes about the wrong brand of cleaning spray. The Caldwells were different, not because they were particularly kinder, but because Harrison Caldwell, I discovered 8 months ago on a random Monday when I let myself in at 9 a.m., was sleeping with a woman I recognized. The woman was not his wife. The woman was my mother. Let that land. Take a second. Because it landed on me like a building. Sandra Reeves, 62, widow of Robert Reeves. Member of 3 charitable boards, and the Wilmette Garden Club, was asleep in Harrison Caldwell's 1,200 thread count sheets in a penthouse that I cleaned for $11 above minimum wage. I stood in the doorway of that bedroom for approximately 4 seconds before I backed out silently, let myself back into the service elevator, went down to the lobby, sat on a bench on the lakefront path for 45 minutes, and then made a decision that changed everything. I did not quit. I did not confront her. I went back upstairs at 10:15, knocked loudly, called out housekeeping, gave them 10 full minutes to adjust, and when I went in, Sandra was gone and Harrison was in the kitchen in a robe, acting perfectly normal, asking me if I could pay extra attention. "To the guest bathroom this week?" I said, "Of course, absolutely. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Caldwell." And then I started paying attention in an entirely different way. Over the next 6 months, I learned things. Not by snooping. I wasn't reading his mail or hacking his phone. I'm not an idiot and I'm not a criminal. I learned things the way invisible people always learn things. By being present in spaces where powerful people forget someone is watching. I learned that Harrison and Sandra had been seeing each other for over 2 years. I learned that Harrison was in the middle of a quiet renegotiation of his estate, restructuring assets in ways that his wife Celeste didn't know about yet. And I learned something else, something that connected Harrison Caldwell to Stuart Pell, my mother's financial advisor, the one who laughed 3 beats late at her jokes and sat next to her at Thanksgiving like a courtier. They were business partners. Not officially, not on paper, but in the particular way that old money men in Chicago do business. In clubs, in restaurants, in handshakes that never get written down. Stuart was the architect. Harrison was the money. And my mother, who I had watched position herself into the lives of powerful men since I was old enough to notice the pattern, was the bridge. The question I hadn't answered yet was, what exactly was my mother getting out of this arrangement? And the answer, when I found it, was so much bigger than I was ready for. My father's estate had never made sense to me. Robert Reeves, a successful architect with 30-plus years of practice, should have left behind more than he did. The house in Wilmette had been paid off. He had a retirement account. He had the kind of quiet, steady financial life of a man who didn't overspend and didn't gamble. But when he died and when the estate was settled, the numbers my mother shared with Natalie and me were modest. Disappointingly modest. Sandra had handled everything because Robert had trusted her completely in the way gentlemen trust difficult women. Not because they're naive, but because the alternative was a war they didn't have the energy to fight. Stuart Pell had been the executor, recommended by Sandra. I had been 29 at the time, overwhelmed with grief and running my own small business and not asking the question. I should have asked. I had assumed Natalie was asking them because Natalie was the competent one. Natalie, I would later understand, had not asked them either. Natalie had been busy. Natalie trusted Sandra. I had spent 6 months, quietly, carefully, with the help of a woman I'll tell you about in a moment, starting to understand what had actually happened to my father's money. The woman was named Petra Voss. She was 48, a forensic accountant I'd found through a connection at one of my other clients, a woman whose divorce case had required exactly this kind of work. Petra charged $400 an hour, and I had paid her with every extra shift, every canceled vacation, every small freelance design job I'd managed to scrape up on weekends. I had not told a single person what I was doing. Not my best friend, not my therapist, nobody. Because here's the thing about being the daughter everyone writes off. They stop watching you. And when nobody's watching you, you can do almost anything. Petra had found threads, not proof yet, not the kind that walks into a courtroom and shuts everything down, but threads, discrepancies in the estate accounting, transfers that moved through shell entities Stuart had been involved with. A timeline that put Harrison Caldwell's investment firm in a curious proximity to some of those transfers. It was painstaking work. It was slow work. And as of the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we were close but not there yet. We needed one more piece. So there I sat at that Thanksgiving table, smiling at my mother's joke, sipping my wine, watching Stuart Pell laugh 3 beats late, watching Ford smile his expensive smile, watching Harrison Caldwell's name sit unspoken in the room like a ghost only I could see. Because here's the thing, nobody at that table knew. Harrison Caldwell had been invited to a New Year's Eve party that Sandra was co-hosting with 2 of her board friends. A party that Stuart Pell was also attending. A party where, for the first time in months, all 3 of them were going to be in the same room in a social context, with their guards lowered by champagne and the comfortable assumption that nothing and no one could touch them. I had been invited too, as Sandra's daughter. Not as a threat, as furniture. When my mother raised her glass the second time, after the laughter had settled, after Patricia had quietly changed the subject, and the dinner had lurched back into something resembling normalcy, she looked at Natalie again. She started talking about Natalie's upcoming research fellowship, something in Boston, prestigious, another gold star for the collection, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not rage exactly, more like the click of something locking into place. I put down my glass. I looked at my mother, and I said, clearly, calmly, with the particular steadiness of a woman who has been doing arithmetic in private for 6 months, "Mom, before you finish that toast, there's something I think everyone at this table should know about our family." The room went completely silent. Sandra's smile didn't fall, it froze. And in the half-second before she recalibrated, I saw something I had never once seen on my mother's face in 34 years. Fear. I didn't say anything else that night. Not one more word about it. I let it sit there in the silence, like a stone dropped into still water, watched the ripples move across every face at that table. And then I picked up my wine glass and I smiled at Sandra and I said, just that I'm grateful for this family. All of it, even the complicated parts. Aunt Rhonda said something about the pie. The conversation moved. But Sandra's eyes did not leave my face for the rest of the dinner, and Stuart Pell excused himself to make a phone call 20 minutes later and came back looking like he'd seen a very specific kind of ghost. Natalie found me in the kitchen around 9:30 when most of the guests had moved to the living room. She stood in the doorway in her burgundy dress, arms crossed, beautiful and unreadable, and she said, "What was that?" I said, "What was what?" She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Don't blow up my life, Carolyn," and she walked back to her husband. "Don't blow up my life." Not, "What are you doing?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Mom was awful and I should have said something," just, "Don't blow up my life." I drove home to Lincoln Park at 11 p.m. I parallel parked my cracked window Civic. I climbed the stairs to my apartment. I sat at my kitchen table, and I opened my laptop and I sent Petra Voss an email with 3 words. Accelerate the timeline, because what Natalie didn't understand, what none of them understood, is that I wasn't trying to blow up anyone's life. I was just finally refusing to let mine keep getting blown up for their comfort. She came up beside me in a winter white pantsuit. Sandra always wore white when she wanted to look untouchable. And she touched my arm like we were close, the way she performed closeness in public. And she said quietly, directly into my ear, "Whatever you think you're doing, stop." I turned to look at her. I said, "I've already done it, Mom." She held my gaze, and in her eyes, I saw the same thing I'd seen at Thanksgiving when I'd half dropped my bombshell and then picked it back up, that flicker of fear underneath the control, like a small flame burning at the base of an enormous, expensive ice sculpture. Then she smiled. She actually smiled, broad and bright, and patted my arm and said, "We'll talk tomorrow," and glided back toward her other guests. We did not talk tomorrow. Because at 7:45 the next morning, Stuart Pell received a formal notification from the ARDC, and at 9 a.m., Gloria Tran filed the civil complaint, and at 9:30, Sandra Reeves called my cell phone 11 times in 40 minutes, none of which I answered. I want you to know what happened over the next 3 months, because the ending of this story is not a courtroom drama. And it's not a screaming match, and it's not my mother weeping on her knees. It's quieter than that. It's sharper. Stuart Pelly hired a defense attorney and began cooperating with the investigation within 6 weeks, because that is what men like Stuart Pelly do when the structure they built starts coming down. They locate the exit and they move toward it at speed. His cooperation implicated the specific mechanics of the estate mismanagement. In detail, that confirmed and expanded Petra's findings. Harrison Caldwell settled quietly, privately, through his attorneys, in a way that involved a significant financial contribution to the civil case and a very strong motivation to never speak about Sandra Reeves publicly again. The man had a wife, grown children, a reputation, and board positions at 2 foundations. He had everything to lose. He lost none of it publicly, and some of it very privately. Sandra did not cooperate. Sandra hired an attorney named Franklin Burke, one of those silver-haired Chicago attorneys who has photographs with senators on his office wall. And Sandra sat behind Franklin Burke and was composed and controlled and made it very clear she would fight everything. And she could fight. The civil case was not simple. Estate law is technical. Gloria had told me from the beginning that we might not win everything, that some of what had happened existed in legal gray zones that were difficult to prosecute, that the goal was accountability and recovery, not destruction. What Sandra had not prepared for was Natalie. I did not ask Natalie to do what she did. I want to be precise about that. I presented her with the documentation, all of it, the full picture, Petra's analysis, Gloria's case summary, on a Saturday morning in January at a coffee shop in Evanston, just the 2 of us. I sat across from my sister and I watched her read it, page by page, and I did not say a single word while she read. Natalie is not an emotional person. She is a cardiovascular surgeon. She has closed chests. She has told families that the person they love did not make it off the table. She is trained to stay above the flood. When she finished reading, she put the papers flat on the table and she put her hands on top of them. Flat, the way you'd hold something down in a wind, and she stared at the coffee shop window for a long time. Then she said, "He left me a letter. I didn't understand at first." She said, "Dad, he left me a letter. When he died. I didn't understand what he was trying to tell me. I thought he was just being sentimental." She opened her bag and she took out her phone and she found a photo of a handwritten letter. She slid the phone across the table to me. The letter was dated 3 weeks before my father died. It was addressed to Natalie because he'd known, I think, that I was too bruised to be the one to fight, and that Natalie was the one with the spine for it, if she ever chose to use it. He wrote, and I will not quote it exactly because it is private and it is ours. He wrote that he was worried about certain financial decisions that had been made without his full understanding. He wrote that he hoped she would look carefully at things after he was gone. He wrote that he trusted her to look after her sister. He wrote that Caroline had always been the one who really saw things clearly, even if she didn't have the power to act on it yet. I sat in that coffee shop and I read my dead father's words, and I understood that he had known. He had known something was wrong, and he had not had the strength or the certainty to fight it. And so he had left the only thing he could leave, a thread in a letter. To the daughter he trusted to pull it. He was right about me. He was right about Natalie, too, in the end. She just needed to be asked. Natalie contacted Franklin Burke directly and informed him that she would be providing testimony in support of the civil case. She also had a conversation with Ford, a long, private conversation that I was not part of, which resulted in Ford making 2 phone calls, one to a colleague in the financial litigation space and one to someone at the Tribune. Not a story, not yet, just a conversation, just a door left slightly open. Sandra's attorney became suddenly, noticeably more interested in discussing settlement. The settlement was reached in April. I am not going to tell you the exact number because it is a legal matter and I've been advised not to. But I will tell you that it covered Petra's fees and Gloria's fees and left enough remaining that I paid off the balance on my Civic and put down a deposit on a studio space in the West Loop where I have reopened my graphic design practice. The agreement included terms that affected Stuart Pell's professional standing in ways that will follow him for the foreseeable future. Sandra paid. Not everything she should have paid, perhaps. Not in the way a Hollywood version of this story would require. No handcuffs, no public meltdown, no perp walk. But she paid, and she knew that I had made her pay, and she knew that Natalie had stood next to me when I did it. And those are things that cannot be undone. The last time I saw my mother so far was at a lunch in May that Natalie arranged. A restaurant in Streeterville, nice but not extravagant, the 3 of us at a window table. Sandra looked older. Not broken. Sandra Reeves will never be broken, but adjusted. Like a building that has had its foundation quietly shifted and is now standing at a very slightly different angle. She did not apologize. I did not expect her to. She made a comment about my new studio space. She'd heard about it through Aunt Rhonda, and she said it sounded like things were coming together for me. I said they were. Natalie ordered the salmon. The lunch was 45 minutes and entirely civil and cost $120. Sandra picked up the check. She didn't make a toast. I think about my father a lot. I think about those $20 bills, the way they'd appear in my coat pocket like small proofs of something, that I was seen, that I was loved, that someone had thought about me quietly and specifically. He was not a dramatic man. He did not fight loudly, but he left a letter, and the letter found its way to where it needed to go. And the thing he was worried about has been, if not fixed, then at least faced. I am not the cautionary tale. I want to be clear about that now, in a way I couldn't be clear about it at Thanksgiving. Sitting at that table with my mother's joke still burning in the air, I never was the cautionary tale. I was the one who cleaned the house where the secret lived, and because they thought I was invisible, I got to see everything. They handed me the keys and forgot that keys open things. My graphic design studio is called Pocket Change, named for the $20 bills. I have 3 clients already. I have a waiting list. The crack in my car window is fixed. Petra Voss sent me a bottle of good wine when the settlement closed and wrote on the card, in her flat, precise handwriting, "You did the work. I have it on my refrigerator." Natalie and I are not best friends. We are not going to become the kind of sisters who call each other every day and share inside jokes and finish each other's sentences. We are too different, and there is too much distance built over too many years, and I am not interested in a fairy tale reconciliation that isn't real. But we have dinner every few weeks. We are honest with each other in ways we weren't before. She told me recently, over pasta in her kitchen, while Ford was at a work dinner, that she's been thinking about what their father wrote, about how he said I was the one who really saw things clearly. She said, "I think I owe you an apology, not just for Thanksgiving. For a lot of Thanksgivings." I told her I wasn't keeping a tab. She said that was exactly the kind of thing our father would have said. We both laughed, and it was real, and it was enough. The maid cleaned the house, and when the house turned out to be built on a lie, the maid was the only one with enough access to find where the lie was buried. My mother made me invisible on purpose. She just forgot that invisible people see everything. That's the story, that's all of it. One daughter is a doctor. One daughter spent 2 years changing sheets in the homes of people who held the secrets that changed everything. I think my father would have found that funny, in his quiet way. I think he would have said something like, "See, it all came out in the wash." He would have handed me a 20. He would have been right. I am Caroline Reeves. I changed the sheets. I found the receipts. I filed the paperwork. I won. Not loudly. Not on television. Not in the way stories are supposed to end, with fire and confrontation and a speech that makes everyone cry. But in the real, lasting, expensive way that actually changes things, quietly.
Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.